Well, for more on China's rural reforms, I'm joined by Jim Harkness, live from Minneapolis, Minnesota. He's senior advisor on China and former president of the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So what would you say have been some of the key reforms China has made in its agriculture sector in the last few years?
Well, I think, as you know, China has a tremendous food security challenge. They have 20% of the world's population, but only about 7% of the world's farmland. And the fact that they've been able to be successful in maintaining food security in the last 50 years has been a tremendous accomplishment. But as we saw in the segment just now, one of the ways that they did that early in the reform period was by dividing up the land into household plots. And so now there are about 200 million very small farms in China, and they're immensely productive. But there are a lot of inefficiencies also when you have farms that are really most of them less than a hectare in size. So a lot of the efforts in the last few years have been experimenting with different ways to try to consolidate land, and so that you can have larger plots and perhaps have greater efficiencies. One way to do that is to encourage people to rent out farmland to their neighbors. So you have individual farms that are larger. They call it family farming rather than peasant farming. Another is to have companies that come in and actually rent out big areas of farmland and may hire the original farmers as agricultural workers. And finally, there was a law passed in 2007 to encourage the establishment of more cooperatives so that farmers could have more economies of scale while still staying on the land.
And Jim, let's also look at land transfer pilot reforms. What's involved and how much progress have we seen?
Well, I think there have been fits and starts. You know, as I was saying, land is still held collectively, but it's split into these household farming units. And in many places, because so many of the peasants have gone to cities to look for work, you actually have land lying fallow because there's nobody there to cultivate it. And that's the origin of some of these reforms. At the same time, though, you know, the reforms that happened in the late 70s and early 80s, you know, the farmers are very attached to their land. And so
Right.
even if they're off in the cities, there really is a sense that they want to hang on to that ability to farm in the countryside if they need to. So it really has been going kind of in fits and starts.
So given some of these shifting dynamics with some of the rural farmers then now going into urban areas and also with these reforms, how are all these changes affecting the rural economy for farmers and the local communities?
Well, you know, there's bad and there's good. I think that one of the very interesting phenomena that's happened just in the last few years that I've observed is you have a lot of what they call new farmers. And oftentimes these are people who maybe grew up in the countryside, went to the city to work or to get education, and instead of staying in the city, decided, hey, there are market opportunities back in my hometown. And so they've taken new technology and new marketing techniques and maybe new networks back to rural areas, and they're experimenting with things like organic agriculture or agritourism or other things. And a lot of them are having a tremendous success. At the same time, some of the very large farms that have moved in, agricultural companies moving in on a very large scale, actually, you know, it can be a challenge for the local farmers that they're competing for. So in some places, you have actually quite a lot of success with the reforms and new sources of income. And in other areas, you have these challenges with very large farms and very large corporations, and then small farmers who are still a little bit left behind.
Now, we know that recently China's Central Leading Group for Deepening Overall Reform said that the rural investment system should be reformed to make agriculture policy more efficient and cost-effective. What impact do you think that could have on the industry going forward?
Well, I think that it could certainly quicken the pace of the changes that are already underway. There are, for instance, already subsidies for companies that can achieve a certain scale in, say, pig production. And further encouragement of that certainly would make those types of trends move faster. One of the real challenges, though, is that small farmers continue to have a lot of obstacles to getting credit. There is a tendency for the resources to flow toward the larger players in the rural economy. So I think one of the challenges going forward will be how to make sure that as more investment goes into rural areas, it's distributed in ways that give opportunities to the less well-off farmers and not just the biggest players.
All right, well, thank you so much for your insights. Jim Harkness, Senior Advisor on China and former President of the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy.